2 of Ethicsverse Day. How's it going, everybody? The first session was phenomenal. All these sessions are going to be on YouTube, of course. We have a phenomenal session number 2 here. This is the great AI debate. We have a great panel of folks. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
We broke a record in the first session, so you guys got a lot to live up to. 13,000 emojis, okay? We only got 20,000 last Ethicsverse Day, so we got to keep that trend going. So I hope you guys had coffee. I hope you had Adderall and that you're feeling real smart today, all right? So I'm going to run through a couple of quick announcements. We just had the behavioral science session with Dan Ariely, Christian Hunt, and Nadej Rochelle. Right now, we are about to launch the great AI debate. Reid and I were at an AI conference a couple of months ago, and it was just a lot of agreeing, and we didn't like that. Me and Reid love to disagree, just for the sake of it sometimes. So we're going to be having a great AI debate. We're going to be talking about, is AI an ethical nightmare? Is it a competitive advantage? And this is not going to be a lot of glad handing. So if you're here for a glad hand sesh, time to hit the bricks, okay? Then we have our keynote, where we have Tyson Duva coming, the current Assistant Attorney General of the DOJ Criminal Division. And then we have a bunch of DOJ insiders along with Matt Kelly, who's going to be moderating. And then finally, we're going to do the Ask Me Anything session. So as we get going, no Adderall for me. Thank you very much. Drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat, connect with someone today, take advantage of this unique thing that we all have, this unique community that we're all a part of. You get no bonus points in life for reinventing the wheel. So connect with someone today. I guarantee any problem that you're trying to solve, somebody on this webinar today has solved it, and reach out for that. And we got 13 CEUs given away for SHRM, HRCI, and compliance certification board. So that's HCCA and SCCE. So we love giving out CEUs, and we love giving out books. So we have the Ethicsverse Library Starter Kit. We're giving away 100 books today. Who loves ya? And the ones we are featuring are these ones that you see on the screen right now. Coexisting with AI, which was written by K. Firth Butterfield. The Ethical Nightmare Challenge. We've given away dozens and dozens of these books. I can't say enough great things about this book. And then finally, Moral Machines by Wendell Wallach. How's it going, everybody?
Awesome. Yeah. Great to be here.
Yeah.
All right, very good.
So far, so good. Plenty of time to go downhill, though.
Well, let's keep the nose pointed up. You know what I mean, Reid?
Yeah, okay.
All right. And we also have the one and only Andy McBride. How's it going, Andy?
Very good, Nick. Pleasure to be here.
Very good. So I'm going to give you guys a little preview. This session is brought to you by... Oops, wrong thing. It's brought to you by Ethico. All right. So we are going to dive in 25% off all Ethico solutions. If you're interested in any of those things, here it is. This is brought to you by Policy Plus. This is our brand new AI-driven, how appropriate, our AI-driven policy creation tool that lets drafting, formatting, attestations, analytics, all in a single platform. And it lets you, take it from, a lot of people have talked about their drafting process takes 8 weeks. We can bring that down and give you full eyes on all the steps in that process. You can draft with AI. You can find regulatory gaps relative to the policies you have. And at any point, you can glance at your entire policy management system and know where you're at, which policies are coming up for renewal, which ones are getting stuck in the review phase, and it can all be done directly in the app. So you can say goodbye to SharePoint. You can say goodbye to policies living all over the place, stale links in SharePoint or in various different documents that are pointing to policies that are several years old. Those are all going out the window. So if you're interested in this, if you're interested in upgrading and really, what's nice about this platform is that, well, first of all, it's built by people like you, insights from those of you on the front lines who are doing these kinds of jobs. We've been able to incorporate a lot of that into this platform. But it's so easy to find the ROI. There's so much pressure right now that we're getting from executive team, from the board to drive more efficiency. And so it's very easy to find the ROI of that. So if you're interested, please go ahead and check it out. And on your console, you should see a link to these toolkits. Our team put together over 20 different toolkits. Again, no bonus points for reinventing the wheel. Check out the toolkits as we get going here. There's a lot of really cool things there that you can leverage to get moving. So with that, let's get a massive emoji explosion for our group here. And I'm going to pass it over to the one and only Reid Blackman, smartest guy I've ever met, to be our blood sport moderator. How's it going, Reid?
Good. It sounds like you need to meet more people.
We might.
Yeah, I'm not particularly bright, so you need to meet some more people.
We might need to.
All right, so should I just kick it off? Should we go?
Yeah, let's kick it off.
Okay. So, hi, everyone. Nick, thanks for having me, for Ethico for hosting. So, yes, I'm here as moderator. I'm going to start with a kind of big question. I think, Andy, it's probably best for you to answer, but anyone else is welcome to jump in. I kind of want to get a big picture overview of what compliance has been doing well and poorly in the past several years. Seems to me like there's been a tremendous amount of disruption, of course, with AI, and that means that a lot of the systems that we have in place are getting stress tested. And I wonder, how well is compliance handling that stress? What has it done well? What has it done poorly?
Let's start with you, Andy.
Yeah, Andy.
Oh, is it to me? Oh, sorry. I thought it was Andy.
Man.
Yeah. All right. Let's go. So what has compliance done well? I think that when it comes to the development of responsible governance, I think that the compliance functions and the teams that I've seen have done a pretty good job, because at the end of the day, we know a thing or two about governance. So policies, procedures, workflows, training. We invariably have a seat at the table, or maybe we're the chair of the discussion around responsible AI. We're also, just because of the work that we do in other compliance areas, pretty good with cross-functional collaboration, whether it be HR, IT, procurement, sales. That's not a new thing for us. And then for many of us, we're pretty familiar with broader enterprise risk management, which I'm sure we'll get into, how we figure out the words, most ethical nightmare when it comes to AI. Having those kind of like broad risk management skills is pretty useful. And this is also not our first rodeo in this kind of like related area. So you think about the rollout of GDPR and broader data privacy regulation, cybersecurity, and the supporting of our IT function with response processes, particularly in the event of a breach. And then finally, when it comes to thinking about what those worst ethical nightmares are with AI, having the ethics and compliance function be part of that discussion is probably a really good idea. And so I think that, as a whole, I've seen that kind of growth in maturity and comfort of compliance teams handling the initial setup of the governance. So then on the flip side, I'm not going to say that compliance functions have done this necessarily poorly. It's rather, what have been the constraints that compliance functions have had to operate under, and how has that affected compliance teams in practice? What are the challenges that they've had to face? And so, for ethics compliance teams, those really big AI enhancement opportunities, whether it be on investigations, due diligence, they actually carry some really big risks for companies. If you think about wrapping AI around how you conduct investigations, there's a ton of issues there, potential risks. Even absent AI, you put AI around it with all of the sensitive data, privacy considerations and whistleblower protections, then you're really going to be having to tread very carefully when you're looking to use AI in the conduct of your investigations. The same with third-party screening and due diligence. It's not like you're doing that in isolation. Your systems are all connected to your ERP and your CRM. And so unleashing AI and just being really careful about, what's it tinkering around with? What systems is it touching and what data is it getting? Those are some really big kind of topics to address that have traditionally caused some obstacles for compliance teams. And then to cap it off, if you are looking to deploy a AI use case within ethics compliance, the DOJ have been very, very clear that you have to make sure that use case does not have any unintended consequences. And maybe later on, I'll come up with a couple of examples of what those use cases may be. And so if you've got those challenges internally, and then maybe a compliance team are dealing with vendors Ethico, accepted, who are perhaps not leaning into AI so much, then they're caught in a trap, right? There are big issues that they have to deal with. There are perhaps vendors that aren't leaning into AI as much, but they feel that they have to be doing something because they're being told by senior leadership that they have to do it. And so the challenge then is, how are they getting past that kind of initial tactical work? I've seen a lot of that over the past year to 2 years, a lot of tactical work being done in AI, but how are they able to take it to that next level and develop cross-functional or even employee-facing projects with all of the constraints that I've discussed? And I think really what it boils down to is that confidence to be able to do that, to speak the language of IT teams and really leaning in and experimenting. But if they don't have the tools to experiment because their company's not letting them have kind of like some of the cool kind of AI tools, then they're kind of caught at this natural ceiling. So those are some of the constraints that I'm seeing, which maybe is just affecting the ability of the compliance teams to be taking it to the next level. Reid? Oh, can't hear you, Reid.
What would you add to that? What would you add to that, Kay? I think Reid's having some audio issues.
Yeah, what would I add to that? See, my work is mainly with companies and countries working out something that I actually like to call wise application of AI nowadays. Because, if we say you're not ethical to companies particularly, they don't like that very much. But if you say you want to use your AI wisely, then I think that they understand that means compliance and good governance and training. And I think probably what I would like to add to it as a first thing would be that training. One of the things that compliance officers are almost unique amongst humans to being able to do is think about risk. Generally, as human beings, we don't do thinking about risk very well at all. And so, the bulk of our employees are not good at risk management. And so I think it behoves us to really think about how do we train people to use the AI that we are offering them so that it gives our governance and compliance teams a lighter lift.
I like that framework of, not kind of making them feel stupid, but to, open their eyes to some ways they might be able to do it in a little bit better. What would you add to that, Wendell? Oh, Wendell's on mute as well. So it sounds like it's just going to be the three of us. No, we can't hear you either, Reid. Listen, this isn't a live show unless we got a couple little hiccups here. So we're going to keep it moving. Reid is just restarting his tab, it looks like. What I would add to that question is it seems like over the last 2 years, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit, Andrew, yourself, that there's not enough experimentation going on. There's some kind of aversion, whether it's kind of guardrails that are being placed by our organization or just our own aversion to adopting this technology that's causing us to, at least increase the risk that we're going to be left behind and not achieve some of the, efficiency gains that are available to us. There's a lot of opportunity to do there's a lot of opportunity to automate some tasks, to do some of that manual work that then kind of historically has crowded out our application of our, unique risk lens, our tool set that we've built over the years. Compliance folks have a very unique perspective that they bring to their organization. And many times, because there's so much manual work, because there's so much kind of paper pushing, so to speak, that application of that true kind of risk mitigating perspective that can add so much enterprise value and drive so much deeper process adherence in pursuit of that culture of integrity ends up kind of getting crowded out. So it's a tough balance to strike, but I think that's probably the thing that I've seen compliance do kind of least well in this new AI era. Reid, are you back with us?
I think so. What do you think?
Round of applause.
Hey.
Okay.
I just
straight back in the tracks, baby.
I am so relieved.
Okay.
Just rambling here. Okay.
Who's talking now? Am I talking?
I'm
going to say some words. So actually, I wanted to get back to the stuff about regulations and what compliance is good at. So it seems to me, and you can tell me that I'm wrong, that one thing that compliance is good at is exercising those muscles that you were talking about earlier about, enterprise risk management and how to build governance and et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
And typically, I think they do that under sort of a clear articulation of what the standards are. And those standards are they're both regulations and laws, and they are clear policies that articulate what's to be done in particular situations. And those things seem to be utterly lacking. Or at best, there's like patchwork, and I'm sure Kay can speak to the sort of legal patchwork that we've got going on. So in the absence of, if you like, clear marching orders from policies and regulations and laws, I mean, how could they possibly exercise those muscles well? Or put slightly differently, do compliance people need to sort of figure out a new way of identifying what those standards ought to be?
And in lieu of that, we are pretty much forced to depend on soft law for our standards. And the problem with soft law is it can be suggested by anybody, and it becomes difficult to know which of the organizations should be recognized as having put forward best practices. But we do have at least ISO and IEEE putting forward very extensive standards for AI management. There are probably more than 50 different standards groups for AI and intelligence systems with autonomous and intelligence systems with IEEE alone, but only some of those have actually been adopted, and we have not got to the point where they have been fully embraced by individual corporations or other institutions that need to follow those standards.
And isn't the other issue, though, I mean, IEEE is, the Association for Engineers, it's for tech people. And compliance people typically don't read documents or standards from IEEE, nor do I think we probably shouldn't expect them to read those kinds of standards. I don't know. It doesn't seem like...
But I think the environment has changed. With the advent of artificial intelligence, IEEE went well beyond technical standards. So technical standards would have been the gauge of a particular wire to be able to, how much electricity a particular gauge could carry of different wiring. With the advent of AI, Konstantinos Karachalias, who at the time was leading the IEEE, he moved the IEEE into looking very much at the societal, social, more broadly, social impact of AI, and came up with a whole regime for putting in place standards that would speak to that. Just a second, Reid.
Yeah.
I think the question here is there another body who has actually established as rich a set of standards and that they have become recognized as best practices? And to my knowledge, no, that you have different institutions looking at different standards at this point as to which they are going to adopt. And I would argue that what ISO and IEEE have done is a bit richer than any other of the standard-setting bodies in the AI adoption area.
So let me turn this a little bit to Kay and Andy and ask something like, suppose Wendell's right, there's some robust standards out there, whether it's IEEE or elsewhere. But compliance people, I don't think, tell me if I'm wrong, can't unilaterally adopt those standards. So even if the perfect standard is written on some piece of paper or something along those lines, even by, an authoritative piece of paper from some, impressive group, I don't know, and tell me if I'm wrong, that compliance people can sort of do much about that. And if they can't do much about that, then what are they supposed to do?
Sorry, go ahead, Kay.
Okay, I was just going to say that, as I said, I've worked with a lot of companies, and I think what I'm seeing is that companies are trying to belt and break. They're either doing nothing, but there are very few of those. And of course, the ones that I work with are doing something. And with the something that they're doing is really saying, okay, if we work around internationally, we're just going to bring in the EU AI Act rules because they are comprehensive. They will cover our asses for anything that's going on in American legislation, and then we'll adopt some self-regulation based upon upon this law. Because the law is so patchwork around the world. And at the moment, that's the most easy to verify and to work with. I mean, I have to say that there's a special place in my heart for the IEEE standards because I was its vice chair. I think that they still hold up really well. And I agree that ISO is also a great place to start, but really sort of choosing something that's going to help you as a company across all of your jurisdictions is, in my view, the way to go. Andrew, over to you.
Yeah. So again, I mean, I think this isn't the first rodeo that compliance professionals have had to go through with trying to thread the needle of multiple different and oftentimes conflicting regulations to try and come up with global and local standards to, comply with the law and manage broader legal risk. If you think data privacy, bribery, and corruption, and that's just the laws. And then you think about all the international standards, like we've mentioned. We have ISO standards with anti-bribery and corruption. In human rights, there's a whole plethora of international human standards. In fact, many of those are now being enshrined into law, and companies have for years been having to try and distill all that into governance that works for that company that appropriately manages the risk. And sometimes they are implicitly taking a risk that they are not belts and braces complying and dotting I's and crossing T's. The other thing I think that is worth thinking about is what is it that we're trying to regulate here? It goes to kind of the company's risk profile. If you're using AI to develop products to sell out into the market, then you probably really should be doing the belts and braces approach. If you're looking to optimize your own internal company systems, then yeah, again, it's pretty important. When it comes to how employees are casually using the use of AI with their chat GPTs or their Claudes, then I think it's less about the law. It's really about principles and going back to the ethics of it all, which again, compliance has a role. And so I think the governance has to be right-sized for the risk profile of the company.
Let me just come back on that, Reid, because I have a good example of that, which is a crossover with engineering, for example. So I was consulted last year by a company who did safety critical, whose job was to provide safety critical systems. And one of their engineers had used their own favorite AI system to calculate the size of a gauge. And when that gauge was installed on site, it blew up because it was not fit for purpose and caused all sorts of problems with the site. And so the company said to me, well, Kate, are we going to get sued for this? Because, it wasn't us. It was this guy using his AI that he had brought to work on his phone. And I said, have you got any policies in place for use of this artificial intelligence by this guy, which, of course, we all call shadow AI. And they didn't have any policies. And so it was a risk that was really easy to mitigate. But a lot of companies haven't even got that far. And I think that to add to Andrew's point, it doesn't just depend upon the company's risk profile. It actually depends upon the company's understanding of where AI is being used in the company and how, and putting in a few very basic guidelines to at least start this process.
So there's at least two strands that I want to pursue that both of you have brought up, that all of you have brought up actually, so one strand is something like, what does effective governance look like? I mean, we've sort of talked about standards already. What's the content of the standards? What do we do with the standards? If we move on from what the standards are to how do we actually implement the standards, then there's a question about what does effective governance look like? So what is effective implementation of those standards, whatever they are, what does that effective governance look like? And then the other strand that we started to touch on is accountability. So this engineer who, got the wrong gauge and things blew up, that's an accountability issue. I want to talk about the first strand first, about effectiveness. So in that story, Kay, I'm wondering about what a policy would have done, right? I mean, a policy is only useful if it's sufficiently implemented, translated to everyone. They understand the policy. They understand how it speaks to their role and their responsibilities and their workflows. In some cases, I don't know that a policy can do much, like the automation bias, people's inclination to just trust the outputs of computers generally and AI in particular, because AI is so confident. So would this person not have, deferred to the AI on the appropriate measurement for the gauge had a policy been in place? So I guess I've got a number of issues with sort of policy as a solution, but yeah, I guess I want to hear more about, and from anyone, how effective really is policy in the context of people's use of LLMs, let alone agents?
I think in this case, sorry, Wendell.
Let me talk just for a minute about what an effective compliance structure looks like, okay? Because where we really have that is in medical ethics and research ethics. And in that context, you get mandates from the government that filter through regulatory agencies that put out regulations. Those then filter down to what standards get established by the standards bodies. The standards bodies integrate the values into the standards themselves. Those are then made available to the companies or institutions that are going to implement them. In the medical side, we're talking about hospitals, we're talking about educational institutions. They have institutional review boards to review various projects that may be put forward. They have ethics committees to work through when some situation arises that has not been anticipated.
Yeah.
That then filters into the corporate policy as to what it might want to institute, which is specific to the corporation. And that would filter down to a compliance officer and how much authority they are or are not given by the management to both educate, train, and perhaps even punish those who violate those compliance standards. That's what a robust compliance regime looks like. But what we have been talking about here, and I'm afraid we're creating a lot of confusion, is Reid started out with the fact that we do not actually have effective governmental mandates or even regulations coming out of the US government. What Kay is talking about is that there's actually rules that have come out of the EU, which can be thought of as the equivalent of regulations and are treated as such. Now, whether those are fully getting translated into standards by standard setting bodies or not, and whether those standards are being adopted by companies that want to deploy AI or not, I think that's what we need to get into a greater discussion about in terms of accountability and corporate policy.
So a couple of things. One is just that, I mean, that sort of roadmap to compliance sounds great, except it takes, in the medical industry, it took decades, right? It wasn't IRBs, the establishment of the regulations behind IRBs and the creation of IRBs and the creation of ethics committees in hospitals. This is, the creation of a huge literature around biomedical ethics. And this is a decades-long endeavor. And the issue I take and I sort of have in mind our audience as compliance professionals practicing today, they don't have time to wait around, for decades until all this happens. And so I'm sort of wondering what's the most effective thing to do while we wait for that kind of platonic ideal of regulation formation over the course of decades, getting refined and passed down and filtered through. What are we supposed to do right now? I took it that one thing that Kay suggested was, create a policy that articulates acceptable and unacceptable use. And I am, it's the great AI debate. I'm expressing, giving something to push back on, which is something like, I don't know, are policies actually the most effective tool in this context? Given that, I'm not sure the policy would have been effective at stopping that, gauge measurer, the engineer who measured the gauge wrong or used AI to measure the gauge. I don't know. So this is sort of me expressing skepticism about policy as the interim solution, or as a major interim solution, as we wait for the evolution of standardization and implementation that you talked about.
Well, let me come back on that then, Reid. I think that companies have to have policies, and they have to have policies because otherwise they have nothing to measure against. And, with my lawyer's hat on, you have to have policies because when you go to court, when you're in that situation that my client was, when you go to court, somebody's going to say, well, what was your policy about allowing your engineers to use any AI tools? And so you have to have a policy. You have to be able to say to the court, well, I said it was okay to use Claude, for example, and this person used X on their device, and they were clearly out with our policy. And so we had a policy in place to stop them doing that. And Wendell talked about punishment. Well, policies can also say, you will not do this, and your employees know that they shouldn't do it. And in my personal view, using AI that has not been sanctioned by your employer should be a sackable offense. It's as straightforward as that in some of these more extreme cases. But it goes back to what Andrew said, which is about, what is your company's risk tolerance in this AI, this AI ecosystem?
Yeah. So I'm going to violently agree with all of you, if that's an expression. You
missed the title of the whole session. Then what are you talking?
Exactly. So it's the policies clearly are important, but again, I go back to kind of what we as kind of ethics and compliance professionals do. It's about behavioral kind of behaviors. How can we use all of our various levers that we have at our disposal to affect change? And that is policies, it is training, it is communications, it is walking the floor, it is collaboration in working groups, it is cross-functional collaboration, it is tone from the top leadership, it is all of it. You can't do it just through policies, and it does take time for you to work through policies. And then once you finally hit that approved policy in the new Ethico policy database, you need to change it again because the regulations have changed. And so you have to take a multidisciplinary approach to risk management with a very significant element of workplace culture in. And I think we're going to get into training a little bit later. And I think that, the training in my mind is just so important because ultimately AI can do anything, right? It can almost do anything. And so there's so much that's now left to the judgment of an employee as to what it does with this Pandora's box.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge of relying on policies alone is that cycle to get it through committee can sometimes take a long time. The technology itself is accelerating so fast, and many times, I'll say it, like the people writing the policies are basing the policy on a picture that they took looking through a pinhole at the organization. The use cases and the things that it's being, that the newest model is being leveraged, or the way that the newest model is being leveraged in the various different pockets of the organization is probably not on the radar of that committee because they're myriad, to your point, they're myriad use cases, and the ease with which you can build an agent or build a project or build something, a chat that can continue to do things and interact with your files, things that, 2 years ago when we were doing these episodes together, we were like, one day it's going to do that. Well, guess what? It's like doing that, and it's doing more than what we even thought of 2 years ago. So, I understand the sort of, belt and braces, if I can be a little British today, the belt and braces or the belt and suspenders that, the policy can have should we go to litigation or establishing some kind of a standard to hold people accountable to. The problem is that it's moving so fast that it's not really like, is it really, to your point, Andy, is it actually like a viable, effective mechanism to influence behavior at scale within the organization?
Next question, Reid.
Oh, I thought he asked you a question. All right. Well,
It was a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I see. So, I actually want to ask Kay a quick sort of technical follow-up, as long as our lawyers hat is on. So, when you talked about regulators or lawyers looking into, what's gone wrong here, and you said, well, you got to point to the policy. This is our policy. Imagine that there's an organization that doesn't have a policy, but they nonetheless have a robust risk assessment culture, practices, et cetera, but it's not measured against a policy. Is that sufficient? I'm getting a little bit technical here, but is it that they need to show that they've done their due diligence, or they need to show specifically that they've got a policy?
They need to show that they have done their due diligence, and the best way of showing that they have done their due diligence is to have good policies in place. That's your belt and braces to pinch
belt and braces. I don't understand that phrase. I don't know what teeth have to do with anything. So, okay, let me ask you a question. This is a question for all of you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Wendell.
A robust risk assessment can be central to having done due diligence.
Yeah,
In other words, it's already an implicit policy if, in fact, you have set up a regime for robust risk assessment.
I mean, part of the problem with the robust risk assessment, though, is that it takes so long, and this thing is moving so fast. So your risk assessment that you did at the start of the quarter, or that you did 2 quarters ago, unless that's being updated in real time, you're always going to be kind of driving in the rearview mirror,
Yeah, I'll double down on that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Wendell.
This is a critical issue of how a corporation deploys AI. And the problem has always been for compliance officers in any field is that there's a tension between the goals of the management and the responsibility of the risk officers. So if the management is going to prioritize speed, innovation, deployment over compliance, then you're pretty well damned. And the compliance officer is in a very risky situation because if things go wrong, they're likely to be blamed, even though they have never been given the resources to manage the situation in hand. 100%. And this has become the critical issue about AI itself. It is being deployed at a rapid speed without putting in place appropriate ethical legal safeguards. And that's why many of us are highly critical of what's going on today, because we are actually putting not just the corporation, but society at risk.
So let's talk. So I'll ask one last question about the sort of policy risk assessment stuff, and then I want to move on to questions about accountability and behavior. I don't know how it's supposed to get done at the speed and scale at which you want. So it seems like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, Wendell, you're saying reasonably, look, if the management just wants to move fast and break things to make a bunch of money, compliance is there's not much they can do about it. They're in a tough position. They're kind of screwed. On the other hand, I'm not sure that compliance is necessarily doing themselves any favors by saying, well, listen, first we've got to pass this, especially in a Fortune 500 company, we've got to pass this enterprise-wide policy. By the time the board approves it, it's going to be like a year plus until the board approves it. And now we got to actually implement the policy. That's going to be a months and years long effort. Meanwhile, the technology has moved on. The policy doesn't speak to the technology anymore. To take the EU AI Act as one example, it was going to be passed in 21 or 22. And then ChatGPT comes out and everyone freaks out. Oh my God, the EU AI Act doesn't include generative AI. That wasn't a thing when we wrote this. Everyone scrambled back. Blah, blah. The EU AI gets passed. Oh my God, agentic AI. And so I'm worried that compliance people might make themselves increasingly, I don't want to say irrelevant, but I'll just say, to be provocative, irrelevant if they're going to focus on methods of governing that defy the demands of managers moving fast. And so either you stick to your guns with policy as slow as it is, the manager's going to have to hit the brakes. That seems like a bad bet. or it's we need to find a way of doing more rapidly implementable and dynamic governance.
Yeah. So I'll give an analogy. So in my career, I spent time at BP, and part of that time was supporting the commodity trading team at BP. And yes, governance is there, but they're needing risk-based decisions like within minutes, like literally minutes, because they are moving commodities around the world, and there's high stakes at risk here. There's value, there's incentives, there's disincentives, and you're kind of the trading lawyer, kind of between them and a prosecution. You have to kind of recognize the dynamic you're in, and in a trading dynamic, you're having to move fast. I think it's no different with AI. You have to recognize that this train is leaving the station. It's already left the station. Companies are investing, and rightly so, in AI to make better products, more efficient processes, whatever it is. People are leaning into it, but we have to kind of figure out a way of, yes, having the governance, having the training, but that way in which we are managing the risk associated with it has to be right-sized. And in my view, and I don't know if we'll get into this, but one of my big passion topics is, this is not just compliance's responsibility. Like we said right at the outset, we don't have all the technical skills to be able to judge whether this particular kind of AI use case in engineering is going to be appropriate or not. We just don't have those skills. That risk assessment, it has to be right-sized and it has to be democratized within the business units, a bit like health and safety. And you're using experts who've got a good grounding in AI, but they've also got a good grounding in the business process that is looking to use the AI and the risks that are associated with that business process. In my mind, that's the only way that you can manage the risk in a sensible way, in commensurate with the speed of what things are happening.
Yeah, and I just want to vehemently agree with Andrew, as that's the phrase that's being used here. But I also think that, what I see in a lot of companies is this divide where, there are the sales teams over here wanting to go fast, and then there is the compliance team. And they need to be integrated, which I think is exactly what Andrew was saying. It takes the whole company, it takes the whole village to adequately think about AI and its governance and its risk. And then it needs the C-suite to be able to sign off on that. So what I see in a lot of companies is an AI advisory board across everybody, either at C-suite level or just below C-suite levels, so that nobody's taking risks that somebody else doesn't know about, because that in itself is a problem. We know, for example, that HR is fundamentally risky when they use AI, but often they're sort of over here and nobody really thinks about them. So you have to knit them all together so that you de-risk.
Yeah. Okay, let's switch a little bit to accountability. I mean, it's already sort of implicit in everything that we're talking about. And we can take, Kay, your example of the engineer as a sort of launching point. Who is accountable? Who's supposed to be accountable in that situation? So when things go sideways, who's meant to be held responsible? Who should be? I'll speak British for a moment. Who's meant to be sacked, if anybody? Because did this engineer receive the proper training? Was it, even if there was a policy in place, was he told about the policy? Did he understand how to use it? Is it the, I don't know, the upstream model developers' fault for creating an AI that so confidently makes things up, so confidently hallucinates? How are we, and this is sort of a very broad question, and there's different things to say, but what can we say that's helpful, if anything, about who's accountable or who ought to be accountable, other than, well, it depends on the situation?
Let me open up with talking about an accountability structure, because we often talk about a situation and try and discern who is accountable for that situation. But when you're in a corporation, accountability depends upon what kind of structure you have put in place for accountability. And again, that's a corporate policy. And that may or may not have been clarified, but generally accountability flows from the top down. So it flows from national mandates, through regulations, through standards, and then through corporate policy, and that delegation of authority to a compliance officer by the management. And the problem we're having now is very few managements understand what to even delegate or want to delegate, and are very concerned about the speed of change and being left behind. So they don't necessarily delegate or give the resources to the compliance and risk assessment bodies to do effective training of the employees that are actually going to be making these decisions, that are going to be working with AI in real time. So there's a great deal of difference on whether you have a process in place in which the employee has been trained and understands the difference between, for example, using an LLM for a relatively insignificant task, or a task where if there's a mistake made, it can be caught, and the employee relying on the LLM for a mission critical application in which they have not done their due diligence as to whether the output they are receiving is actually credible.
So, okay, I want Clay and Andy to, yeah.
I agree exactly with what Wendell said. You know, it depends upon the type of problem that you have caused. I think that we should talk about training, because training is the thing that is going to help a great deal of people. But before we talk about the individual companies, you know, one of the things that we are seeing is that very few people, taking the IP litigation out of the picture, very few people are suing the foundational model makers. But now we are seeing more and more people begin to sue the next level down, the people, the banks, the insurers, the oil companies, everybody who are using AI. It may be that they don't, you know, they didn't get a job because of AI. Those sort of problems of the way that AI is used are actually in the courts at that level, rather than the foundational model maker. And you might say, well, you know, it's the foundational model maker's fault. But I have yet to see anybody actually sue them, apart from, of course, the Google character AI cases around suicide.
Can some of you, one of you or more, say something about, you know, compliance is very focused on behaviors, obviously. Mm-hmm. And one concern that someone might have is that a lot of times the intentions of the bad behaviors are bad. You don't sort of accidentally bribe someone. That's pretty rare, I would think. Corruption is usually not an accidental thing. But I suppose my concern is something like AI behaves in ways that defy the intentions of the foundational model makers, the engineers and data scientists within those companies that are downstream, Kay, that you talked about. Let's say the insurance companies, CPG, financial services. So it behaves in ways that defy their intentions, and they modify, of course, in various ways, those foundation models. They, technically they add adapters and et cetera, RAG, blah, blah. But it still defies their intention. So it's not bad behavior necessarily when it goes sideways. And then that end user, again, they might be using a tool that is in some way biased or privacy violating. It hallucinates. They don't intend to be overly deferential to AI, but they're human, so subject to automation bias, just like the rest of us. And so I guess I'm wondering about the tension between we need to govern behavior on the one hand, and on the other, AI acts in all sorts of ways that defy the intentions of both the builders and the users.
Well, is that understood? Have people been trained to fully understand that these are probabilistic instruments that not only hallucinate, but they actually make mistakes? And furthermore, as probabilistic instruments, on certain occasions, they are going to come up with long-tail judgments. In other words, when you look at the curve of judgments they could make, they aren't going to come up with they aren't going to be dealing with a situation which is a commonplace situation. They're going to be giving a judgment on a very unusual type situation. And again, this is all a question of whether you have a culture of education within your institution that the people who are working with the AI systems understand their values and their limitations and understand when not to rely upon the systems and due diligence and at least verify that the output they are receiving is based on facts and credible information.
And I think, just to give another example, you had the example last year or maybe the year before now, where a consulting company put out a report that was patently wrong. I think it had 14 hallucinations in it. And
Deloitte.
The client picked it up, So, what was wrong there? Was it training? Was it that the people were working too hard and thought that they needed to get past their training? Were they lazy and had left it to the last minute? Those are sort of human problems, but also problems that we need to be looking for amongst our workforce, as well as so you can train them to do it well. But if you then want them to do, work 60 hours in 40 hours, you're going to have people go back to AI and do it sloppily. And we see that in universities a lot, where people say, well, I had to get my essay in by 12 o'clock, midnight, and I only had an hour to write it, so I got an AI to write it.
Yeah. So, part of the challenge right now is that people's discernment is not sort of keeping pace with the, call it the sort of capabilities and the perceived hallucination rate of these tools. So it's easy, back to that automation bias that Reid talked about earlier, it's easier to kind of rely on it. And then on the other side of this sort of balance, we have Parkinson's law, which says work fills the available time. And so the question of the work and the available time are both kind of in question, which just creates this huge gap, this huge opportunity for more of this work slop and more of these kinds of things to make it out, and more of these kinds of things to make it out into the world that can be extremely damaging for the brand, irrespective of the training that's kind of been in place. Because all those decisions are kind of being made at the kind of boots on the ground level at the margin, the essays due at midnight, there's a marginal decision made there.
I was glad that Kay raised it, because I was trying to translate it into terminology that we as ethics compliance professionals are familiar with. And when we translate it into training, I keep going back to the concept of the fraud triangle, right? So you've got the pressure, you've got the opportunity, and the rationalization. The example of the student trying to get their essay in by a particular time, or an employee trying to get a strategy paper in, there's a strict deadline. You're right, that under significant timing pressure, their bonus is on the line. They've got a great opportunity because they've got this amazing tool called AI sitting on their desk that they can drop in really sensitive strategic papers into it. And they can rationalize and say, yeah, I'm doing the company a favor here. Or I'm basically delivering on this strategy in super quick time. Aren't I great? And so I think that translating that into kind of, how we are engaged with employees and calling out those pressures in a broad sense, applying kind of those ethical values, rather than trying to play whack-a-mole with multiple individual kind of technical scenarios where it may come up, because we'll never come up with all those technical scenarios.
100%.
We have to take it down to those kind of values. And in my mind, if you kind of distill it down to our values, like we do with so many other things in compliance, then if they don't follow those principles, then I think it's going to be very difficult from an accountability thing to say, well, it's not on me, it's on someone else.
Phenomenal point.
We've gotten into a universe where corporations feel they have to move very quickly in deploying AI. But the research seems to suggest that less than 30% of companies that actually have deployed AI have done so successfully. And even less than 10% of corporate leaders are happy with the actual AI deployments that they have instituted. So I think, keeping that in mind is a way of pointing out to corporate leadership that yes, compliance, if done right, is going to slow down your implementation, but the likelihood of a satisfactory implementation could go up significantly.
I'm going to ask one last question. We've got 4 minutes left. I want to get unusually pragmatic. So it feels like we've talked about a number of different issues. We talked about, what should the standards look like, or are there standards? How do they ideally get implemented? How do they actually get implemented? The ways in which AI is different. How should we think about accountability? And I'm sort of trying to empathize with the average audience member right now, who's a compliance officer who is overwhelmed with the gray. And I guess I want to ask each of you to give a thing, one or two. Okay, look, in light of all this gray, here's the gray area that you should really focus on making more black and white, something along those lines. What are they supposed to do, given that the standards are still up in the air, how the organization as a whole is going to implement, or how they'll implement a policy, if they're going to create a policy, what that policy looks like, what should they be really driving towards right now and trying to get the most clarity on at the moment?
In my view, I think that ethics compliance professionals should be learning as much as they can about AI to turn that gray into color.
I agree.
Self-training or self-education, something like that.
Yeah, it's training yourself and training and ensuring everybody in the company is trained. I do just want to answer Kristen Rees. How does a multi-generational workforce affect AI implementation? There is one study out that says that 48% of AI natives are actively sabotaging their company's AI strategy because they don't want to lose their jobs. So that's one thing to think about. And also, I think there's a lot of research about women are much more skeptical about how to use AI. So they may use it more in a more safe way than I think now 24% of men in America who are using it as a lover, and therefore are much more trusting.
24%?
24%. Oh my God.
Which of you guys is doing that? Because it ain't me. You know what I mean?
Wendell, how dare you?
So let me make two things. One is, I think, review the existing standards that are out there and adopt those that look best to you. Some of these standards are unbelievably rich. So, for example, the IEEE, as I said, has more than 50 bodies of standards. I happen to have sat on one of them, which was the governance standard. It took us 6 years to develop that standard and get it passed by the IEEE as a whole. So that's not something superficial. So I'd say pick a particular standard. Then number two, go to your corporate bosses and say, this is the standard I'm going to implement, and this is how I think it is best adapted for our company and our company's goals. And do I have the authority to do so? Number one, are you giving me the authority to take responsibility for it? And are you giving me the resources and authority to effectively train the employees who are going to be expected to follow this standard?
That's great. And Nick, you want the last word?
Yeah, thank you. I would say, one thing that Andrew said, you have to jump in the pool. You got to start kind of swimming around. I would encourage you to not look for some kind of training. Just jump in and start doing things. There's a ton of stuff on YouTube, but you have to kind of understand what the shape of this thing is if you're ever going to be able to govern it, or leverage it inside of your program. You got to start you can spend all summer reading about how to swim. You're not going to know how to swim until you jump in the pool. So that's one. And the second one is, I think you need to start to crowdsource what these use cases are around your organization. It is probably orders of magnitude more than what you could ever even imagine. And so getting some kind of a register, whether it's a simple survey that you then can aggregate that information, put it into an LLM yourself, and see what some of those trends are. It's really hard to write a policy, and it's really hard to, even develop these principles to, de-risk the organization in the use cases throughout the organization. We don't even know what those use cases are. I have, we're giving away a bunch of books today. We're giving away 100 books. Little plug for Reid's book. He came on our show a couple of months ago on book launch day. Phenomenal. This is an international bestseller, at least in my mind it is, for the Ethical Nightmare Challenge. And an interesting model that he presents in that book is a way to really push this decision making and push these frameworks or these principles, as Andrew was saying, down to the front line. So hope you win a book today. If not, go to Amazon and pick that up. But all of these books are absolutely phenomenal. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for the great AI debate. We had a little bit of, bumps in the road at the front, but this was a phenomenal session. Tons of great comments in the chat. And if you can believe it, we are just getting started. We got 2 more sessions coming up here. We have our keynote, which is next. We're going to be talking to Tyson Duva, current Assistant Attorney General in the DOJ's criminal division, and then we're going to have our AI insiders directly after, hosted by the one and only Matt Kelly, and then we're going to wrap the day up with the Great Women in Compliance Ask Me Anything session. So definitely follow everybody that is on this panel on LinkedIn, and definitely check out Integrity Bridge. If you don't know Andrew McBride, he has very famous Compliance Officer of the Year, Compliance Program of the Year, and he is now helping a lot of organizations navigate and wrestle with technology and some of these topics that we're talking about today. So let's take a quick break, and we'll see you guys back here soon. Love you all.